What's up builders, it's me, Jimbotron, back at you with another video. In today's video, we'll be doing a tier list on Genji in Overwatch Stadium, ranking all of his powers and items and going over what they're good for and how you should be using them. Let's get into it. First, we are going to be ranking Genji's stadium powers, starting off with S tier. To me, S tier are powers that are just strong in every single scenario. You can throw these into pretty much any build and they're going to perform. First up, we have Forged Under Fire. Now this is, in my opinion, Genji's strongest power. I know I'm a bit biased because it's my favorite, but it's just ridiculous. Every time you deflect, you heal 125% of the damage you mitigate. So if you block 100 damage, you're healing 125 back. You can literally full heal just by pressing deflect. The best part is this doesn't need to be reflected, it just needs to be blocked. So even if your deflect accuracy isn't great, or you're against melee heroes, you're still getting full value. And then, when you pair this with anti-beam coating, suddenly you can heal off beam heroes like Zarya and Moira as well. They don't stop shooting, so you're just farming healing off them. It's genuinely insane sustain. Next we have Hidden Blade. Even after nerfs, this is still easily S tier. It gives your melee plus 15 damage, which doesn't scale, it's just added on top, which is a bit annoying, but the real value is the 60% lifesteal. With something like Siphon Gloves, you're healing around 50 to 60 health per melee, which is crazy for early rounds. And then, when you get to Dragon Blade, you now have 60% lifesteal on your ultimate, which is double the 30% base game perk. It makes you so hard to kill during Blade unless you completely mess up. Both of these just let you get away with way more than you should and generate a ton of value. Now moving into A tier. These are still very strong powers, they can carry builds, they're just not as universal. First we have Hashimoto's Bane. This makes it so after you use Swift Strike or Deflect, your next secondary fire shoots 2 extra shurikens that home in and deal 50% damage. So effectively you're getting about 33% extra guaranteed damage on that burst. This is huge for combos and lets you one-shot even later into the game when everyone has inflated health pools. It scales really well. Next is Hanamura's Healing. This gives you 35% of your Swift Strike and crit damage as overhealth. So it's basically a 35% lifesteal, but in overhealth form. It works in both weapon and AP builds, which is why it's so versatile. It's not S tier is because overhealth doesn't generate cash. When you heal with something like Forged Under Fire or Hidden Blade, you're getting money back. With this, you're not. So even though the sustain is strong, it doesn't help your economy, which matters a lot. Now B tier. These are good, but they need the right build to shine. First is Sacred Shuriken. I know some people think this is S tier, but for me it's high B, maybe low A at best. It gives you 2 extra shurikens on primary fire, which sounds great, but it messes with your tempo because the animation is longer. On top of that, Genji usually wants to play close range where secondary fire is stronger anyway. And to really make this work, you need a lot of weapon power and attack speed. So it can carry, but it's not as consistent as the higher tiers. Next we have Deflectobot. This got buffed recently and it's actually pretty solid. It increases your projectile reflection speed by 200%, and for the first 2 seconds, it automatically reflects everything back at your target. People don't realize how much damage gets wasted during deflect because you're not aiming it properly. This fixes that. And if you extend deflect to 3 seconds with Slicey Coolant, the speed bonus still applies for the full duration, even though the auto-reflect is only the first 2 seconds. Last in B tier is Spirit of Sojiro. This is probably one of the most underrated Genji items. It gives you up to 5 seconds of deflect cooldown reduction based on how many projectiles you reflect. So in a good scenario, you're basically resetting your deflect and chaining it with dash resets, which massively increases your mobility and survivability. The problem is it's not always consistent, which is why it sits in B. Now moving into C tier. These are the ones that just feel underwhelming unless you build around them heavily. First we have Cybernetic Speed. This gives you 2% attack speed per shuriken hit, stacking up to 15 times for 30%. Sounds insane, but the stacks only last 3 seconds. So even in Dragon Blade, you're maybe getting 1 or 2 extra swings. Genji just doesn't benefit enough from sustained spam for this to be worth a full power slot. Next is Worm's Maw. This one is just overcomplicated. It makes targets take up to 50% more Swift Strike damage through stacking. So you can take dash from 50 up to around 75 base. That sounds good, but AP Genji just isn't strong enough right now to justify it. It works best with Hashimoto's Bane because you can stack it instantly, but outside of that combo, it's pretty weak. Finally, we have Ito Strike. This gives you a 110 damage Dragon Blade swing at the end of Deflect. Sounds good on paper, but in practice, it's awkward. To get value, you basically have to end your Deflect early, which means giving up one of your most important defensive tools. And at higher levels, that's just not worth it. Without Hidden Blade, it's just a flat 110 damage hit that doesn't even chunk a full health bar in Stadium. And finally, D tier. These are just not worth picking. First is Laceration. This adds damage over time to Swift Strike. It takes your dash from 50 to around 68, but that's only about 9 damage per second. That's just not worth an entire power slot. Next is Dragon's Breath. This splits your Dragon Blade damage into 2 instances. So instead of 1 hit, it's half damage plus another half. The issue is armor reduces both instances, so instead of losing 7 damage, you lose 14. So your ultimate is actually weaker against armor, which is ridiculous. Now moving on to items. Genji has 13 unique items, and they're definitely not all equal. S tier is Traversal Kinetics. This is the only Genji item I'm putting in S tier, and it's just because of how valuable it is. It gives you 10% primary fire damage and 10% Swift Strike damage, which combines into 20% Dragon Blade damage. So straight away, it's the best round 2 blade scaler you can take. On top of that, if your Swift Strike doesn't connect, the cooldown goes from 8 seconds down to 4. That is massive. It lets you disengage from bad fights, reposition, and just play way more aggressively without being punished. This is pretty much a must pick in almost every single Genji build. Now moving into A tier. First we have Slicey Coolant. This item used to be terrible. It literally just gave you an extra second of deflect and that was it. But now it's actually really strong. It makes your deflect hit both in front and behind you, which basically doubles the area you cover. This is huge because it means you don't have to worry about what's behind you while you're deflecting. And when you pair this with something like Forged Under Fire, you're just farming healing from everywhere. I do think this item is slightly carried by that synergy, but as long as Forged is as strong as it is, this will always be a top tier item. Next we have Ambusher Optics. This is a really nice item. It gives 25% more melee damage, which applies to both your quick melee and your Dragon Blade, even though the icon makes it look like it's for Swift Strike, which is a bit confusing. The main reason you take this though is the bonus damage from behind targets. If you're someone who's good at Genji combos, this makes your one-shots way more consistent. On bigger targets, it's actually really easy to hit as well, so you just get a lot of value out of it. Next is Enduring Edge. This one is very simple but very strong. It gives you 10% weapon power, which honestly isn't why you take it, but the real value is the extra 4 seconds on Dragon Blade. That turns your blade from something that gets you maybe 1 or 2 kills into something that can genuinely wipe an entire team. And even if you mess up a dash, with things like Traversal Kinetics, you'll usually get another chance anyway. It just gives you so much more room to work with. Finally, in A tier, we have Transference Delta, which is one of my personal favorites. It makes your ultimate 15% cheaper, which is already really nice, especially in builds where most of your damage comes from Blade. But the main reason this item is so strong is the Armor Restore. When you use Dragon Blade, you get all of your armor back instantly. And this doesn't just apply to the armor it gives you, it applies to all armor you have. So if you combine this with something like Vitality and Slicey Coolant, you can be restoring like 200 to 250 armor instantly when you blade. It basically means you can blade in way more situations and survive way more than you should. Now moving into B tier. These are items that are situationally good, but just not great most of the time. First we have anti-beam coating. This makes it so that when you deflect, beam damage actually gets mitigated. And when you pair this with Forged Under Fire, it means you can now heal off beam heroes as well. So in games where you're against something like Zarya or Moira, this is actually really strong because you remove one of your biggest weaknesses. The problem is, it's completely dependent on the enemy team comp, so you can't justify putting it any higher. Next we have Deflecting Dash. This item has a lot of potential, but it's very awkward to use. What it does is when you Swift Strike, any projectiles that hit you get redirected towards your crosshair. So in theory, if you dash into someone while they're shooting, you can reflect their damage straight back at them. That sounds really strong, and it can be, but the timing is quite difficult and inconsistent. So unless you're very comfortable with it, it's hard to get consistent value. Finally, in B tier, we have Swift Loader. This item is kind of similar to Cybernetic Speed, where the stats just don't fit Genji that well. It gives 10% attack speed and 30% ammo, which isn't bad. But for a purple item, it's just not that impactful. You do get an extra 20% attack speed after Swift Strike, which is nice. But again, Genji doesn't benefit that much from sustained fire. So unless you're specifically running an attack speed focused build, this is generally just a weaker option. Now moving into C tier. These are items that I think need a buff. First we have Clean Sweep. It gives 15% ability power and 15% lifesteal, which are actually decent stats, but the effect is just not very useful. It relies on hitting multiple targets with Swift Strike, which just isn't something Genji consistently does. So most of the time, you're just getting the stats and not the actual value of the item. Next is Spiked Grip. This one is interesting because the stats are actually quite good for its tier. It's basically the same stat profile as Swift Loader, but on a lower tier item. The problem is the effect, which is the reload just doesn't matter for Genji. So while it's okay as a filler item, it's not something you ever really want to prioritize. And finally, D tier. First we have Sparrowhawk Feather. This gives you extra jumps and lets you reset them when you dash. You can do some funny things with it, like staying in the air permanently with traversal kinetics. But outside of that, it's just not needed. Genji already has wall climb and great mobility, so this doesn't really give you anything useful in most situations. Next is Equilibrium Gear. On paper, this sounds amazing. 5% max health per second while wall climbing. But in practice, it just doesn't work. You can't wall climb for long enough for it to matter, so you're only getting tiny amounts of healing. And when you compare it to other healing items, it's just completely outclassed. And finally, we have Ninja Souls. This one just doesn't make sense. It makes you move faster during Deflect, which actually makes it harder for enemies to hit you. And since Deflect gets value from being hit, you're actually reducing your own value by taking this. It also gives very weak stats, so overall, it's just not worth picking at all. Okay builders, that's everything for today. I know it was a longer one, but these tier lists are hard to keep short. Till next time builders.